Wolfless Omega, asked to shift as a joke at the trial. But her transformation left alphas frozen. "If she has no wolf, she has no soul," Sibylla whispered, her voice carrying through the silent, cavernous hall like a poisoned dart. "Look at her. She is empty space in the shape of a woman." The laughter didn't roar. It rippled, cruel and sophisticated, among the velvet-clad elite of the High Council. In the center of the obsidian floor, Hadley Greymore stood alone, her knees trembling against the cold stone. She didn't look at the high dais where Alpha Ivar Stonebloom sat, his face a mask of bored stone. Nor did she look at the executioner's blade resting ceremonially against the wall. "Come now, Hadley," the Alpha's voice rumbled, not mocking, but terrifyingly indifferent. "Entertain us. Show us the beast that refuses to breathe." Hadley closed her eyes. They wanted a parlor trick. They wanted the broken girl to break a little more. But deep in the marrow of her bones, something that had been sleeping for 22 years finally opened a gold-flecked eye. And it was angry. The winter in the Greymoor Distinct was not just a season, it was a sentence. The wind howled through the cracks of the servants' quarters, a sound that mocked Hadley every night. The wind had a voice. The trees had a voice. Even the lowest scullery maid could growl and flash amber eyes when frustrated. Everyone had a voice, except Hadley. At 22, Hadley Greymore was a genetic ghost. In a society where hierarchy was dictated by the strength of one's shift and the potency of one's pheromones, Hadley was an anomaly. She was an Omega, technically, but even Omegas could shift. They were soft, nurturing wolves. Hadley was nothing. The null, they called her behind her back. The empty cup. "Move it, Wolfless." Hadley stumbled as a heavy shoulder checked her into the rough-hewn stone wall of the pantry. She gripped the basket of winter root vegetables she was carrying, knuckles white, forcing herself not to drop them. Jocelyn Hardwick stood there, radiant and terrible. Jocelyn was a beta, but she carried herself with the arrogance of an alpha because she was Sibylla Crestthorne's right hand. And Sibylla was the future. Or so everyone said. "The alpha is arriving within the hour," Jocelyn sneered, flicking a piece of lint off Hadley's grey woolen shoulder. "Try to keep out of sight. It offends the guests to see the defects on display." "I am assigned to the hearths, Jocelyn," Hadley said, her voice steady despite the racing of her human heart. "I have to be in the great hall to keep the fires fed." "Then be invisible," Jocelyn snapped. "If Ivar Stonebloom sees you, he might mistake you for a stray human and snap your neck just to save us the food you eat." Hadley watched her leave, the heavy oak door slamming shut. The threat wasn't entirely empty. Ivar Stonebloom was the alpha of the Stonebloom Pack, the ruling body of the Northern Alliance. He was coming for the trial of Ascension, a decennial event where the pack hierarchies were challenged, solidified, or shattered. It was a time of violence and revelry. Hadley adjusted her apron and moved toward the kitchens. She knew the stories about Ivar. They said his wolf was a creature of nightmare, black as pitch and twice the size of a normal man. They said he had no mate because no she-wolf could withstand the intensity of his bond. "Don't listen to the vipers, child," a raspy voice came from the chopping block. It was Wendelane Fairvale, the oldest cook in the Greymoor estate. She was an elder, half-blind, whose wolf had long since retired to the back of her mind, leaving her with a sharp tongue and sharper wisdom. "They are just nervous," Wendelane said, slicing a turnip with lethal precision. "The trial makes monsters of men and fools of women. Sibylla is terrified she won't be chosen as mate of the year. She needs someone to kick to feel tall." "I'm easy to kick," Hadley murmured, picking up a heavy iron poker to tend the stove. "I don't bite back." "You don't bite yet," Gwendoline muttered, almost to herself. Hadley paused. I never will, Gwendoline. I'm 22. If the shift hasn't happened by 18, it never happens. I am human in everything but bloodline. Bloodline is a tricky thing, the old woman croaked. Some blood is water, some is oil, and some is liquid fire that waits for the right spark. You keep your head down tonight, Hadley. The air feels heavy. The spirits are restless. Hadley looked out the frosted window. The sun was setting, casting long, bruised shadows across the snow. She felt it too, a headache pressing behind her eyes, a vibration in her teeth. It felt like the air before a lightning strike. She didn't know it then, but the storm had a name, and he was walking through the front gates. The great hall of Greymore Manor was a cavern of firelight and shadows. Tapestries depicting great hunts hung from the rafters, and the air was thick with the scent of roasted venison, pine, and the musk of 100 shapeshifters. Hadley moved like a ghost along the perimeter. Her dress was coarse grey wool, meant to blend into the stone. Her job was simple: keep the 3 massive fireplaces roaring to combat the bitter northern chill. She was kneeling at the central hearth, wrestling a massive log into the embers when the room went silent. It was a sudden, suffocating silence, as if all the oxygen had been sucked out of the hall. The double doors groaned open. Ivar Stonebloom entered. He was larger than life, a towering figure in black leather and fur. His hair was the color of a raven's wing, swept back from a face that seemed carved from granite. A scar ran through his left eyebrow, not marring his beauty, but sharpening it. But it was his eyes that froze Hadley in place. They were not the amber or gold of a typical wolf. They were violet, a deep, unnerving storm purple. He didn't walk, he stalked. Behind him trailed his entourage, including Verity Ashcourt, his beta, a woman with eyes like flint and a reputation for ruthlessness. Hadley tried to shrink into the shadows of the hearth, but the log she was holding slipped. It struck the iron grate with a deafening clang, sending a shower of sparks cascading onto the stone floor. The sound shattered the reverence of the Alpha's entrance. Every head turned. 100 pairs of predatory eyes locked onto the girl in the grey rags kneeling in the soot. Hadley's breath hitched. She froze, waiting for the reprimand, waiting for the Alpha of the Greymore pack to banish her. Ivar stopped. He turned his head slowly, his gaze sweeping over the crowd of finery before landing on Hadley. He didn't look away. For a heartbeat that lasted an eternity, Hadley felt stripped bare. It wasn't just a look. It was a physical sensation, like a warm hand pressing against her chest. Her heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Thump, 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 thump. Ivar's nostrils flared. He inhaled deeply, a frown creasing his forehead. He took a step toward her, drawn by something invisible. Ivar. Sibylla Crestthorne stepped into his path, breaking the trance. She was wearing a gown of crimson silk, cut low to show off the mark of her high status. Welcome to Greymore. We are honored. Ivar blinked, the violet fire in his eyes dimming slightly as he looked at Sibylla. He looked back at Hadley, but the moment was broken. Hadley scrambled up, dusting ash from her skirt, and retreated into the darkness of the servants' corridor. But she heard him. As she fled, her human hearing, which had always been sharper than it should be, picked up his low, rumbling voice. "Who was that?" Ivar asked. "Oh, just a servant." Sibylla's voice dripped with dismissal. "A genetic dead end, a wolfless. Ignore her, my Alpha. She is of no consequence." "Wolfless," Ivar repeated. The word didn't sound like an insult in his mouth. It sounded like a riddle. Hadley leaned against the cold stone of the corridor wall, clutching her chest. Her skin felt hot, feverish. Why had he looked at her like that? Alphas looked through omegas, especially broken ones, but Ivar had looked at her. Well, well, a silky voice came from the shadows. Hadley jumped. Tahlia Ravencrest, a visiting noblewoman known for her chaotic nature, was leaning against a pillar, smoking a thin, herbal cigarette. "The Stonebloom wolf caught your scent, little mouse," Tahlia grinned, showing too many teeth. "That's unfortunate for you." "I don't know what you mean," Hadley stammered. "He smelled something," Tahlia mused, blowing a ring of smoke. "Or perhaps he just smelled the tragedy on you. Either way, Sibylla saw it too. And Sibylla doesn't like sharing the spotlight." Tahlia pushed off the wall and walked past Hadley, pausing to whisper in her ear. "If I were you, I'd run. Tonight is the trial, and the wolves are hungry for sport." The trial of Ascension was not a single combat, but a night of challenges, tests of wit, strength, and dominance. It was tradition for the hosting pack to provide entertainment, usually sparring matches or displays of shifting prowess. Hadley had hidden herself in the kitchens, scrubbing pots until her hands were raw, hoping the night would pass without incident. But fate, it seemed, had a cruel sense of humor. "You, girl." It was Ulara Morwell, the head housekeeper, looking pale and nervous. "You are summoned to the high table." Hadley dropped the scrubbing brush. "Me? Why?" "Do not ask questions. The Alpha asked for the girl from the fire. Sibylla insisted you be brought out." Ulara's eyes were sympathetic but firm. "Go. Wash your face. Do not make them wait." Hadley walked into the great hall like a prisoner walking to the gallows. The atmosphere had changed. The wine had been flowing for hours. The air was thick with aggression and lust. The Alphas were posturing, the Betas were gambling, and the Omegas were trying to stay out of the crossfire. When Hadley entered, the room didn't go silent this time. Instead, a ripple of snickering followed her. She approached the high table. Ivar sat in the center, a goblet of wine untouched before him. He looked bored, dangerous and lethargic. Sibylla sat to his right, her hand resting possessively on his arm. Jocelyn stood behind them, smirking. "Here she is," Sibylla announced, her voice bright and brittle. "The little ember tender." Ivar's eyes locked onto Hadley again. Up close, the intensity of him was overwhelming. It smelled like ozone and crushed pine needles. He leaned forward, resting his chin on his fist. "You have a name?" Ivar asked. "Hadley," she whispered. "Speak up, girl," Jocelyn barked. "Hadley Greymore," she said, louder. "A Greymore," Ivar noted. "Yet you wear the grey of a servant." "She is unfortunate," Sibylla cut in, her fingers tightening on Ivar's arm. "She has no wolf, Ivar. She is 22 and has never shifted. She is a defect." The word hung in the air. The court watched, waiting for the Alpha's reaction. Disgust? Pity? Ivar studied Hadley. He didn't look disgusted. He looked confused. "No wolf?" he murmured. And yet, he trailed off, shaking his head, as if clearing a fog. "It's quite sad, really," Sibylla continued, sensing she was losing his attention. She decided to twist the knife. She stood up, raising her glass. "In fact, we were just discussing the strength of our bloodlines, how pure the northern blood is. Hadley here serves as a perfect contrast." Sibylla circled the table, approaching Hadley. She loomed over her, smelling of expensive perfume and rot. "Ivar, my love," Sibylla called back to the Alpha. "You've seen our warriors fight. You've seen our hunters track. But have you ever seen a Wolfless try to be one of us?" The crowd laughed. "What are you doing, Sibylla?" Ivar asked, his voice low, a warning growl threading through it. "A joke, Alpha." Sibylla smiled cruelly. Just a bit of levity before the serious challenges. She turned to Hadley, her eyes flashing with malice. Go on, Hadley. It's the trial. Everyone shifts at the trial. Why don't you try? I can't, Hadley stammered, backing away. Just push, Jocelyn shouted from the back, inciting more laughter. Maybe if you squeeze hard enough, a puppy will pop out. Shift for us, little dog, Sibylla hissed, grabbing Hadley's chin and forcing her to look at the crowd. Show the alpha what a broken thing looks like. Stalk for us. Growl. Do something other than cower. Hadley pulled away, stumbling back. Her heart was beating so fast it hurt. The humiliation burned hotter than the fires she tended. She looked at Ivar, pleading silently for him to stop it. But Ivar was gripping the edge of the table, his knuckles white. He looked like he was in pain, fighting his own internal battle. He didn't intervene. Do it! The chant started from the drunken tables. Shift! 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 It was a nightmare, a sea of jeering faces. The heat of the room spiked, and then the pain started. It wasn't the dull ache of sadness. It was a sharp, tearing agony in the center of her chest. It felt like a rib snapping. Hadley gasped, doubling over, clutching her stomach. Look, Sibylla laughed. She's pretending. She's acting it out. No, Hadley gasped, falling to her knees. The stone floor cracked under her hand. Cracked. The sound was like a gunshot. The laughter cut off instantly. Hadley screamed, a sound that wasn't entirely human. It was deeper, resonant, vibrating the wine in the goblets. Her back arched violently. The grey wool of her dress tore at the shoulder, not from a shifting muscle, but from a burst of pure kinetic energy. Ivar stood up, overturning his chair. Everyone back, he roared, his voice shaking the rafters. But it was too late. The heat in Hadley's blood reached a boiling point. She didn't feel the familiar sliding of bones she had heard described. She felt expansion. She felt ancient gates unlocking. She looked up, her eyes wide. The amber and brown of her irises were gone. Her eyes were entirely silver, molten, glowing silver. What is that? Jocelyn whispered, the colour draining from her face. Hadley opened her mouth to scream again, but what came out was a sound that hadn't been heard in the north for 1,000 years. It wasn't a bark, it wasn't a howl, it was a roar, and as the light exploded from her skin, blinding the court, the alpha of the Stone Bloom pack felt his own wolf, the monster, the beast of nightmares, do something it had never done before. It whimpered in submission. The great hall didn't just go silent. It ceased to exist as a place of politics and revelry. It became a cage containing a god. The light that erupted from Hadley Greymore wasn't the soft gold of a shifting omega, nor the red flare of a warrior alpha. It was the blinding, absolute white of a dying star. The force of it threw Sibylla Crestthorne backward, her crimson dress tangling around her legs as she scrambled across the floor, shrieking, not in mock horror, but in primal terror. Where the girl in the grey rags had knelt, a beast now stood. It was massive. Its shoulder height cleared the high table. Its fur was not merely white, it was crystalline, shimmering like diamond dust caught in a blizzard. But it was the aura that crushed the room. It was a physical weight, a gravity that forced every wolf in the hall, beta, warrior, and elder, to drop to their knees, baring their throats instinctively. Even Ivar Stone Bloom, the alpha of the north, the man who had never bowed to anyone, found his knees hitting the stone. His black wolf, the shadow beast that terrified armies, was scratching at the back of his mind, whining like a pup. "Goddess," his wolf whispered. "Queen." The great silver wolf shook its coat, sending a spray of sparks into the air that hissed as they hit the wine-stained floor. It turned its massive head, fixing its eyes, pools of swirling, molten mercury on Sibylla. Sibylla whimpered, covering her face. "Don't, please," the wolf growled. It wasn't a sound of throat and lung. It was the sound of a glacier cracking. It stepped forward, a single paw the size of a dinner plate, crushing the goblet Sibylla had dropped. Kill her, the crowd expected. Tear her apart. But the silver wolf did not kill. It leaned down, hot breath blowing Sibylla's perfectly coiffed hair into a frenzy, and exhaled a puff of mist that smelled of ozone and ancient ice. It was a dismissal, a judgment. You are beneath slaughter. Then, the wolf looked at Ivar. For a second, the connection snapped into place, a cable of iron and lightning connecting their chests. Ivar gasped, his human hands gripping the tablecloth. He saw intelligence in those silver eyes. He saw Hadley, and he saw a rage so profound it burned him from 10 feet away. With a snort of disdain, the wolf turned. It didn't walk to the double doors. It launched itself. With a movement too fast for the eye to track, it cleared the tables and crashed through the heavy oak and iron-bound doors as if they were made of parchment. Splinters rained down. The cold night air rushed in, extinguishing the torches. The hall was left in darkness, filled only by the sounds of weeping and the stunned, heavy breathing of alphas, realizing they were no longer at the top of the food chain. Ivar was the first to stand. His legs felt weak, his blood boiling with a fever he recognized instantly. "The hunt!" Ivar rasped, his voice unrecognizable. "Kill it!" Jocelyn screamed from under a table, hysterical. "It's a monster! Kill it before it comes back!" "No!" Ivar roared, the command slamming into the pack members and freezing them in place. He vaulted over the table, his violet eyes glowing in the dark. "No one touches her! If she loses a single hair, I will slaughter this entire room." He sprinted toward the shattered doors, shedding his leather and silk, his bones cracking and reshaping mid-stride, until a massive black wolf burst into the snow, howling a song of pursuit that was equal parts apology and obsession. Hadley didn't know she was running. She only knew the song of the earth. The world had changed. It wasn't grey and cold anymore. It was a vibrant explosion of scents. She could smell the sap moving sluggishly in the pine trees. She could hear the heartbeat of a sleeping bear 3 miles away. She felt the snow under her paws not as a chill, but as a texture, crisp, supportive, alive. She was running through the ironwood forest, the forbidden ancient woods bordering the Greymore estate. Her mind was a fragmented storm. Why did I shift? Why now? The wolf, the entity she shared this body with, didn't offer words. It offered feelings, protection, freedom, power. She had heard the legends of the Wolfless. They were usually killed at birth or relegated to servitude. But Wendelane had whispered stories of the primals, wolves so ancient that their blood skipped generations, hiding until it was strong enough to survive the transformation. Hadley slowed near a frozen creek, her sides heaving. She caught her reflection in the ice. The silver wolf stared back. She was beautiful. She was terrifying. Snap! Her ears swiveled. The sound was sharp, a boot on a twig, not a wolf, a human weapon. Hadley spun around, a low growl rumbling in her chest. Emerging from the tree line were 3 figures dressed in white tactical gear, armed with crossbows loaded with silver-tipped bolts. They weren't from Greymore. They wore the crest of the Ashcourt family, Verity's kin. "Target acquired," one whispered. "The abomination." Hadley's instinct was to run, but her wolf planted her feet. No more running. The first bolt flew. Hadley moved before the sound of the trigger release even registered. She didn't dodge. She swatted the bolt out of the air with a paw, the metal clattering uselessly against a rock. The speed was impossible. The hunters froze. "Did you see that?" Hadley didn't wait. She lunged, covering the 30 feet between them in a single bound. She slammed into the lead hunter, pinning him to the snow. She didn't bite. She roared in his face, the sheer concussive force of the sound shattering the glass of his goggles. "Fall back!" the second hunter screamed. But before they could retreat, a black blur tore from the shadows. Ivar. The black wolf hit the second hunter like a wrecking ball, tossing him into a snowbank with a sickening crunch of ribs. He didn't kill the man, but he incapacitated him with surgical precision. The third hunter scrambled up a tree, dropping his crossbow. Ivar stood over the fallen hunter, panting, his black fur stark against the white snow. He turned to Hadley. The two wolves stood in the clearing, illuminated by the full moon. The black wolf, the king of the north, lowered his head. He didn't bare his teeth. He whined, a low, pleading sound, and took a tentative step toward her. Hadley, his mind brushed against hers. It was a telepathic link, faint but undeniable. The mate bond. "I am here." Hadley's wolf bristled. The memory of the laughter in the great hall was fresh. The memory of him watching, silent, while they tormented her. "You watched," she projected back, her mental voice sounding like grinding stones. "I was paralyzed," Ivar pleaded. "The power, it stunned me." "I am sorry." He took another step. Hadley snarled. She wasn't ready to forgive. She wasn't ready to be a mate. She was barely ready to be a wolf. She turned and leaped across the frozen creek, the ice holding her immense weight as if she were a feather. Ivar moved to follow, but a sudden explosion of purple powder erupted between them. Wolfsbane dust. Ivar choked, coughing, forced to shift back to human form to cover his nose. He fell to his knees, retching, as he watched the silver wolf vanish into the dark, churning tree line. From behind a tree, Talia Ravencrest stepped out, holding an empty pouch. She looked at the retching Alpha and shrugged. "Give her a minute, Stonebloom," Talia said, lighting one of her herbal cigarettes. "If you chase her now, she'll rip your throat out. And honestly, you deserve it." The blizzard came out of nowhere, as if the sky itself was mourning the upheaval of the night. Hadley had shifted back. The adrenaline had crashed, leaving her shivering, naked and human, huddled under the roots of a massive, upturned oak tree. The magic of the shift had healed the old aches of her body, but the cold was a new enemy. She wrapped her arms around herself, teeth chattering. "Stupid," she muttered. "Stupid wolf, you run away without a coat. Here." The voice was deep, rough, and close. Hadley scrambled back, grabbing a sharp rock. Ivar stood at the entrance of her small shelter. He was wearing his fur-lined cloak and trousers, his chest bare and glistening with melting snow. He held out a bundle of fabric, his tunic. "Get away from me," Hadley hissed. "You'll freeze within 10 minutes, Hadley," Ivar said, his voice devoid of the command tone he used at court. He sounded tired. "Please, take it." He tossed the tunic. She caught it, pulling it on quickly. It swallowed her frame, smelling of him. Pine, rain, and safety. She hated that it smelled like safety. Ivar didn't come closer. He sat down in the snow, just outside the reach of the roots, creating a barrier between her and the wind. "I won't touch you. I'll just block the wind." "Why are you here?" Hadley asked, her voice trembling. "Did you come to finish Sibylla's joke?" Ivar flinched. He turned to look at her, the scar on his eyebrow stark white against his flushed skin. "There was no joke, Hadley. There was only my failure." "You are the Alpha," she accused. "You let them call me a dog." "I let them talk because I am arrogant," Ivar admitted, his violet eyes dark. "I thought I was above their petty cruelty. I thought I was bored." He laughed bitterly. "And then I saw you, and I realized I wasn't bored. I was waiting. Waiting for what? for the other half of my soul. The wind howled around them, a whiteout screaming through the trees. You can't say that, Hadley whispered. You don't get to claim me just because I turned out to be powerful. If I had stayed wolfless, you would have let them execute me. No, Ivar said fiercely. He shifted, turning fully toward her, ignoring the snow piling on his bare shoulders. Why do you think I stopped the executioner? Why do you think I summoned you to the table? I didn't know you were a primal. I just knew that when you walked into the room, the color came back into the world. I was trying to figure out why. He reached a hand out, palm up. The bond, Hadley. You feel it. It's not just biology. It's gravity. Hadley looked at his hand. She did feel it, a magnetic pull that made her want to crawl into his lap and sleep for 100 years. But fear was a habit she couldn't break. They are hunting me, she said. Ashcourt's men. They had silver bolts. Ivar's expression darkened, shifting from lover to killer in an instant. Verity, he growled. She fears the old bloodlines. She thinks a primal wolf brings the end times. Do I? Hadley asked. Am I a monster? Ivar looked at her, huddled in the dirt, wearing his oversized shirt, hair matted with leaves. You are the judgment we deserve, Ivar said softly. But you are not a monster. He moved then, sensing her shivering had turned violent. He crawled into the space under the roots. Hadley stiffened, raising the rock again. Peace, Ivar murmured. He sat beside her, not touching, but radiating heat like a furnace. I won't touch you, but you need body heat. Share my warmth, please. Hadley hesitated. The cold was biting into her bones. Slowly, warily, she lowered the rock. She leaned an inch toward him, then another, until her shoulder pressed against his arm. The contact was electric. A jolt of warmth flooded her system, chasing away the chill instantly. Ivar exhaled a shaky breath, but kept his hands firmly in the snow. Verity has summoned the culling guard, Ivar said, staring out into the white abyss. They will be here by dawn. We are trapped, Hadley. The pass is snowed in, and my pack is in disarray. So we die? Hadley asked. Ivar turned his head, his face inches from hers. No. Tomorrow, we fight. You and I. They want a monster. We'll give them 2. He looked at her lips, then up to her eyes. But tonight, you sleep. I will keep watch. No one gets past me. Hadley watched him, the strong line of his jaw, the snow melting in his dark hair. For the first time in her life, she wasn't the one serving the fire. Someone was finally the fire for her. She closed her eyes, leaning her head against his shoulder. If you betray me, Ivar Stonebloom, she murmured, sleep dragging her under. I will eat you. Ivar chuckled, a low rumble in his chest. I'm counting on it, little wolf. Outside, the storm raged, burying the world in white, hiding the 2 wolves from the armies gathering in the dark. Dawn broke over the ironwood forest like a bruised eye, purple, grey and swollen with the promise of violence. The silence that followed the blizzard was heavy, a suffocating blanket that muffled the world, but it couldn't hide the metallic click of a weapon safety being disengaged. Hadley woke with a start, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She was tangled in the furs Ivar had scavenged, but the warmth they offered was gone, replaced by a biting chill that had nothing to do with the weather. Ivar was already awake. He stood outside the root system of their makeshift shelter, shirtless despite the freezing temperature. Steam rose from his broad shoulders, and his muscles were pulled tight as bowstrings. He held a jagged branch he had snapped from the oak, gripping it like a broadsword. His skin rippled, the shadow of his wolf pushing against the surface, desperate to be let out. They are here, Ivar said, his voice a low rumble that vibrated in Hadley's bones. "Stay down." Emerging from the white mist were the culling guard. They were nightmares made flesh, wolves encased in black iron armor that seemed to swallow the light, their faces hidden behind featureless visors. They didn't move like men. They moved like machines, synchronized and silent. In their hands, they held lances tipped with electrum, a rare, volatile alloy that burned shapeshifters on contact, searing flesh and suppressing healing factors. There were 20 of them, forming a perfect, inescapable semicircle. "By order of the High Council and Elder Ashcourt," the lead guard boomed, his voice distorted by the helm into a metallic rasp. "We are to purge the anomaly. The target is designated, Class Omega Null. Threat level, cataclysmic." "She is not an anomaly," Ivar roared, stepping forward to shield the entrance to the roots. His violet eyes glowed with lethal intent. "She is your queen by blood, right? Look at the aura. Can you not feel the weight of the primal?" The lead guard didn't hesitate. "We see only a threat to the stability of the Northern Alliance," he replied tonelessly. He raised his lance, the tip glowing with a faint, sickly yellow light. "Execute!" The air exploded with motion. Ivar shifted mid-air, a transformation so violent and fast it blurred the vision. The black wolf tore through the remnants of his human pants, crashing into the front line of the guards with the force of a wrecking ball. He was a whirlwind of shadow and fury, snapping the shaft of the first lance with his jaws and sending the wielder flying into a tree with a sickening crunch. But there were too many of them. Hadley scrambled out from the roots, her breath catching in her throat. She watched as the guards coordinated their attack, using their shields to box Ivar in. They were disciplined, ruthless. "Hadley, run!" Ivar's voice echoed in her mind, strained with pain. He lunged for a guard on his left, but another struck him from the right. An electrum lance grazed his flank, sizzling against his fur. Ivar yelped, a sound that tore through Hadley's heart, and stumbled. The smell of burning fur and ozone filled the clearing. "They are going to kill him." The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. "They are going to kill him because of me." Panic clawed at her throat. She tried to reach for the silver wolf, to call upon that godlike power she had felt the night before. But fear was a heavy chain. What if I can't control it? What if I kill Ivar too? Another lance struck home, piercing Ivar's shoulder. The black wolf went down to one knee, snarling, blood staining the pristine snow bright red. The sight of his blood snapped the chain. It wasn't a shift this time. It wasn't a physical transformation of bone and fur. It was something older. It was a command, written in the code of her DNA. Hadley didn't drop to all fours. She stood tall, her spine straightening, her human hands clenching into fists at her sides. She opened her mouth to scream, but it wasn't a scream of terror. It was a frequency, a resonant hum that shook the icicles from the trees. "Kneel." The word wasn't spoken. It was blasted psychically outward, a shockwave of pure alpha dominance. The effect was instantaneous and devastating. The shockwave hit the culling guard like a physical wall. The iron armor buckled inward, as if crushed by a giant hand. 10 guards were thrown backward, their lances shattering in their grips. The snow in a 30-foot radius around Hadley vaporized instantly, creating a perfect circle of dry, dead earth. Her eyes were no longer brown. They were molten silver, glowing with an intensity that made it hard to look at her. She walked forward, her bare feet touching the frozen ground, the air shimmering around her with heat. "You dare!" she whispered, her voice layered with the growl of the beast, echoing as if 2 beings spoke at once. "You dare hunt mine?" The lead guard, struggling to his feet, raised his shattered lance. "Monster!" Hadley raised a hand. She didn't touch him. She simply swiped her fingers through the air. A gust of wind, concentrated and razor-sharp, sliced through the clearing. It hit the guard in the chest, lifting him off his feet and throwing him 50 yards back into the dense tree line. Silence fell. The remaining guards, battered and terrified, scrambled back, dropping their weapons. Ivar, bleeding but standing, looked at her in awe. He shifted back to human form, ignoring his wounds, his eyes wide. She hadn't shifted. She had channeled the primal energy through her human form. She was a conduit of pure power, bridging the gap between man and beast. From the ridge above, a slow, mocking clap echoed. Talia Ravencrest stood there, silhouetted against the rising sun. She was flanked by a dozen warriors from independent clans, mercenaries and outcasts who owed allegiance to no one. She tossed a cigarette butt into the snow and grinned, though her eyes were sharp and calculating. "Well," Talia shouted down, her voice cutting through the tension. "I think that settles the debate on whether she has a soul. Need a ride back to the castle, your highnesses? I have a feeling the party is just getting started, and I'd hate to miss the look on Sibylla's face." The Great Hall of Greymore was a scene of controlled chaos. The massive oak doors, shattered by Hadley's exit the night before, had been hastily boarded up with rough timber, casting the room into a gloomy twilight. The air was thick with the smell of stale wine and fear. Sibylla Crestthorne sat in Ivar's high-backed chair at the high table, her knuckles white as she gripped a goblet of wine. She had spent the last 12 hours spinning a web of lies, but the threads were snapping. "The culling guard will handle it," she assured the nervous court for the 10th time, her voice shrill. Ivar was bewitched, a dark magic. Once the monster is dead, the spell will break, and he will return to his senses. We will resume the trial. Will we? The voice cut through the nervous chatter like a knife. Verity Ashcourt stood by the massive stone fireplace, her face grim. She was watching the flames, her hand resting on the pommel of her sword. "The energy I felt last night, that was not a mutation, Sibylla. That was not dark magic. That was a primal. If you have sent men to kill a primal, you have doomed us all to the wrath of the ancestors." "She is a defect," Sibylla shrieked, slamming her goblet down. Wine splashed onto the table like blood. "She scrubbed my floors. She is nothing. A genetic dead end." Boom! The sound was deafening. The boarded-up entrance didn't just open, it exploded inward. Heavy timber splinters rained down on the court for the second time in 24 hours, sending nobles scrambling for cover. Dust and snow swirled in the opening. Through the haze, a figure emerged. Hadley Greymore walked in. She was wearing a borrowed fur cloak from Talia, stained with mud and dried blood. Her hair was wild, a tangle of wind-blown knots, and her face was streaked with soot. But she looked nothing like the girl who had cowered yesterday. She looked like war. She looked like the storm itself. Ivar walked a step behind her, limping slightly. His chest was bare, wrapped in makeshift bandages that were already seeping red, but his violet eyes were fixed on the high table with cold, deadly promise. Behind them poured Talia's warriors, surrounding the room, weapons drawn. "You," Hadley said. She didn't shout, but her voice carried to every corner of the silent hall. She pointed a trembling, soot-stained finger at Sibylla. "Get out of my chair." Sibylla laughed, though it sounded hysterical, bordering on madness. She stood up, smoothing her dress with shaking hands. "You think because you survived the woods you can command me? I am a Crestthorne. I have alpha blood. I am the future of this pack." "You have coward's blood," Ivar growled, stepping up beside Hadley. The sheer menace radiating from him made the nearest nobles flinch back. You sent assassins to kill your own alpha. That is treason. The penalty is death. I did it for the pack, to save us from her, Sibylla screamed, her eyes darting around the room, looking for support. Jocelyn, guards, seize them! Kill the witch! Jocelyn Hardwick, standing in the shadows near the kitchen entrance, stepped forward. She looked at Hadley. She saw the silver fire dancing in Hadley's eyes, a fire that promised judgment. She looked at the decimated helmets of the culling guard that Talia's men were tossing onto the floor as proof of their victory. Jocelyn dropped her dagger. The clang of metal on stone was the only sound in the room. No, she whispered, backing away. I'm not fighting that. I choose life. Cowards! Traitors! Sibylla screeched. Desperation broke her sanity. She shifted, her russet wolf bursting forth in a spray of shredded silk. With a snarl of pure hatred, she lunged across the table, jaws aiming for Hadley's throat. It was a foolish, desperate move. Hadley didn't flinch. She didn't shift. She simply moved with that impossible, primal speed. She caught the russet wolf mid-air, her human hands gripping the beast's throat. With strength that defied physics, she slammed Sibylla onto the high table. The heavy oak cracked down the middle. Hadley leaned down, her face inches from the snapping jaws of the russet wolf. Her eyes flared silver, blindingly bright. I could kill you, Hadley said, her voice echoing with the dual tone of the silver wolf, vibrating the teeth in Sibylla's mouth. I could snap your neck like you wanted them to snap mine. I could erase your bloodline from this valley. But you are not worth the stain on my conscience. She lifted the wolf and threw her. Sibylla tumbled down the stairs of the dais, crashing onto the stone floor and shifting back into a naked, weeping human woman, broken and defeated. Hadley turned to the court. The silence was absolute. My name is Hadley Greymore, she announced. I am not wolfless. I am the wolf that creates the pack, and I am taking back my house. The confrontation wasn't over. The air in the room was still electric with tension. Verity Ashcourt stepped forward from the hearth. She drew a long sword, the steel singing as it left the scabbard. She was an elder, a traditionalist, and the most dangerous fighter in the room aside from Ivar. She did not look afraid. She looked calculating. You have strength, child, Verity said coolly, pacing towards the center of the room. But strength is not authority. Violence is the tool of the beast, not the ruler. The law states that the alpha is chosen by combat or by the unanimous submission of the council. I do not submit to anomalies. I do not submit to chaos. Then you will submit to me, Ivar said, moving to intercept her, his claws extending. No, Ivar. Hadley put a hand on his chest. The contact sent a shower of sparks flying between them, grounding her, centering her. She needs to see. They all need to see. Hadley walked toward Verity. She carried no weapon. She wore no armor. You fear me because I break your rules? Hadley said softly. You think I am chaos because you cannot control me. I know you are chaos, Verity said, raising the sword into a guard stance. Prove you can lead, or die. Hadley closed her eyes. She reached deep inside, past the anger, past the fear, past the human girl who had scrubbed floors and eaten scraps. She reached for the core of the silver wolf. It wasn't a monster. It was a guardian. It was the spirit of the north itself, cold, unyielding, but life-giving. She didn't shift. She simply unfolded. She released her aura, not as a weapon to crush, but as a blanket to cover. She pushed her dominance out, filling every corner of the room, soaking into the stone walls. It was heavy, like a weighted blanket of lead. It forced the air from lungs. It pressed down on the instinctual brain of every wolf present. It was the feeling of standing before a god. The pressure was immense. One by one, the alphas in the room dropped. Not out of fear, but because their wolves compelled them to bow before the prime. It was biology. It was irresistible. Jocelyn knelt, pressing her face to the floor. Talia knelt, a look of reverence replacing her usual smirk. Even the servants in the back, the omegas and betas, knelt. Verity Ashcourt stood trembling, the sword shaking violently in her hand. Sweat beaded on her forehead as she fought her own biology. Her wolf was screaming at her to submit, to bare her throat, to acknowledge the queen. It cannot be, Verity gasped, her knees buckling. The legends, the white wolf, are true, Hadley whispered, opening her eyes. They were solid silver, devoid of white or pupil. Kneel, Verity. The command was absolute. It was the voice of the mountain. Verity's sword clattered to the stone. The elder fell to her knees, bowing her head so low it touched the cold floor. "My queen!" she choked out, her voice breaking. Hadley stood alone in the center of the room, the only one standing in a sea of bowed heads. Then she felt a warm, solid presence at her back. She turned. Ivar Stonebloom, the alpha of alphas, the king of the north, the man who had terrified nations, was sinking to one knee. He took her hand, his rough, scarred fingers gentle, and pressed his forehead against her knuckles. "Ivar, you don't have to," she murmured, the silver fading from her eyes, returning to warm brown. "You are my mate." "I know," Ivar said, looking up at her. His violet eyes held a devotion that warmed her frozen heart more than any fire ever could. "That is why I am doing it. You are my mate, Hadley, but you are also my alpha. Today I serve the silver." Hadley looked out at the room. She saw Wendelane in the corner, smiling a toothless, knowing smile as she wiped a tear from her cheek. "Rise," Hadley commanded, her voice steady and clear. "All of you. We do not kneel in Greymoor anymore. We stand together." Conclusion. The winter eventually broke, giving way to a spring that was greener and wilder than any the North had seen in a century. The ice thawed, and the rivers ran high and fast, mirroring the new life pumping through the veins of the pack. Greymoor Manor was rebuilt, the shattered doors replaced with silver-inlaid oak that depicted the story of the Silver Wolf. Sibylla was exiled to the southern packs, stripped of her name and rank, forced to learn humility the hard way. Jocelyn was stripped of her status and put to work in the kitchens, a fitting irony she accepted with surprising grace, finding a strange peace in the simple work. Hadley and Ivar ruled not as king and queen, but as a dyad, two halves of a whole. The pack grew stronger, attracting omegas and broken wolves from across the continent who sought sanctuary under the banner of the Silver Wolf. They created a new kind of hierarchy, one based not on the strength of the jaw, but on the strength of the spirit. On the balcony overlooking the forest, 6 months later, Hadley leaned against Ivar's chest. The evening air was crisp, smelling of pine and impending rain. His arms were wrapped around her waist, his chin resting on the top of her head. "Do you miss the silence?" Ivar asked softly, his breath warm against her ear. "The days when no one looked at you?" "Sometimes," Hadley admitted, watching the moon rise, full and bright above the tree line. "It was safer in the shadows. But safety is just another word for a cage." She turned in his arms, pulling him down for a kiss. It tasted of pine, rain, and a promise kept. "I like the howl better," she whispered against his lips. Ivar smiled, pulling her closer. "Then howl with me, my queen." She had been the girl with no wolf, the empty cup, but she had learned the most important lesson of all. Even an empty cup can hold the ocean, if it is strong enough not to break. Moral of the story: the world will try to define you by what you lack. They will call your silence weakness and your differences defects. But often, the things we suppress are not our flaws. They are our greatest powers waiting for the right moment to wake up. Do not let the world break you. Let it show you how strong you truly are. If you enjoyed Hadley and Ivar's journey from rejection to reign, please like this story, share it with your pack, and subscribe for more tales of fated mates and forbidden magic. The winter eventually broke, giving way to a spring that was greener and wilder than any the North had seen in a century. Greymore Manor was rebuilt, the doors made of silver inlaid oak. Sibylla was exiled to the southern packs, where her name meant nothing. Jocelyn was stripped of rank and put to work in the kitchens, a fitting irony she accepted with surprising grace. Hadley and Ivar ruled not as king and queen, but as a dyad. The pack grew stronger, attracting omegas and broken wolves from across the continent, who sought sanctuary under the banner of the Silver Wolf. On the balcony overlooking the forest, Hadley leaned against Ivar's chest. His arms were wrapped around her, his chin resting on her head. "Do you miss the silence?" Ivar asked softly. "Sometimes," Hadley admitted, watching the moon rise. "But I like the howl better." She turned in his arms, pulling him down for a kiss that tasted of pine, rain, and a promise kept. She had been the girl with no wolf, the empty cup, but she had learned the most important lesson of all. Even an empty cup can hold the ocean, if it is strong enough not to break. Moral of the story: the world will try to define you by what you lack. They will call your silence weakness and your differences defects. But often, the things we suppress are not our flaws. They are our greatest powers waiting for the right moment to wake up. Do not let the world break you. Let it show you how strong you truly are. If you enjoyed Hadley and Ivar's journey from rejection to reign, please like this story, share it with your pack, and subscribe for more tales of fated mates and forbidden magic.